we can strive to have a bigger, better sort of impact on the world. And what does that look like? I mean, people have been fixated on reusable cups and water bottles for years, but I mean, I'm not sure that's saving the world. It's not bad per se. Do it, you should all do it, but ultimately, what we need to do is use our voice and lend our voice to different systems that can create change. The political system, we all have to vote. Vote with the environment and people in mind.
I was watching your TED talk you did a little while ago, and I really resonated with that. And then recently, having seen what happened down in Cornwall with some of these spillages or overflows that they're calling them, I really felt the need to kind of reach out and kind of talk to you a little bit more about the work you do and the why, but equally kind of what got you to this place in the first place. So let's maybe start from the beginning, start a little bit of a background into who you are, what you do, and why.
Yeah, look, it's always a good question, and I've come to the conclusion that you sort of, as your life progresses and your career progresses, you can sort of retrofit this quite romantic story about how you went on the journey. But I genuinely have always been like passionate about the outside world, from being a young kid, fascinated by just anything that was nature, animals I found, stuff I found in the wild, the big patch of wild land at the end of my garden. As I grew up, rock pools, seashores, anything at all. My heroes were naturalists and people who had spent their lives, researching and documenting nature. And so that was really my first sort of thing. And I had a particular fascination for the coastline. I was born in London and raised in London, but we used to go away a lot to the southwest of England, the southwest of France, and those were special moments for me. I yearned to go further afield. Our neighbours where I grew up, they often used to go to the Caribbean, and they'd come back with shells for me and books about the shells, and I'd always want to go further afield. It was before the age of everyone flying all the time. It was a sort of a simpler time where a few people sort of flew and most people didn't. And that was really my first love, just nature. And then as I grew up, I became really into sports, running, particularly football, and then surfing. And surfing was this thing that fused my first love with a new love for burning adrenaline. Really, I'm always sort of on full throttle, and I think I need things to burn adrenaline. So surfing did that and took me into the wild where I could see stuff. You see all sorts in the sea. So yeah, it was a fusion of two great loves that remain to this day, and actually grow, now, by the day still.
Yeah, and I guess it's also really nice as fathers as well to be able to hand down that love of the outdoors to our children as well.
Yeah, my son Darwin, my wife is called Sarah.
Great name, by the way.
Thanks. He's 14 now, and he loves surfing, but he's a really good bodyboarder. So he loves surfing the steep and hollow waves of Cornwall. There's a few spots that he particularly likes. I'm mainly stand-up surf, but I do bodyboard with him on those waves sometimes, and I like it too. But he's braver than I am. We had some pretty chunky waves over the weekend, and I was on the nursery slopes compared to his antics. But yeah, he loves it, and gets us seeing different parts of the coastline, reefs, beaches, stretches of sand and rock that we wouldn't see otherwise. And it's a great access point to appreciating different things. The wild world around us, not just animals, but the ecosystem and everything that interacts in that, and even the physical aspects, the wind. You get used to, you can live in Cornwall long enough, you sort of look at the sky and you pretty much know what the wind is just instinctively. You feel you're really in tune with the tides, you're really in tune with things, and that is it's great. It's something that a lot of people have lost, actually being in tune with the sort of ticking of time, and how it affects all sort of living things around us, and the seasons, and what grows, what doesn't grow, what you see, what you can expect to see throughout the year. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of tell me a little bit more about the work that you do today in respect to like conservation, marine conservation.
I've been working in marine conservation for a long time through Surfers Against Sewage, but I've just changed jobs to an incredible organisation called Oceana, and I'm going to be building a new team in the UK, really looking at restoring abundance to our seas. And that's another way of describing managing fish populations in the right way, and managing fisheries, and how much damage they do or don't inflict upon fish species and populations around the coastline. We've got really abundant seas around the UK, but most of our fish stocks, I think about 70%, 65, 70% are fish beyond scientific evidence. So they go beyond what science says is sustainable. And so Oceana's there to fight that, because of course people are always going to fish. You're not going to ban fishing, and people depend on fish and the seafood for protein. So they do a lot of work on that. So I'm going to be working on some big targets over the next few years to create more sustainable fisheries and ban things like bottom trawling that really damage our marine environment. I'll also be working on marine protected areas with the team, and oil and gas is going to be a new campaign too, to look at the marine impacts of that industry in the North Sea, or the potential threats of it. So yeah, quite exciting campaigns. I'm building a new team to add to what is a few hundred people, about 300 people around the world, working in incredible locations on amazing campaigns to restore and protect the ocean. And so that's what I'm going to be focused on. But a sort of a big step in some ways on from SAS. I had a great time building SAS from just a handful of people to 30 team members working on water quality, particularly, and plastic pollution. But I'm quite excited about working on new, challenging campaigns and learning all about them.
One of the things that I was intrigued to kind of chat to you about was a little bit more about this work in a little bit more detail, because kind of bearing in mind some of the challenges that we see. If we look at the UK, we've just issued, I think it was a month ago, the UK government issued around 100 licenses for oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, and also we look at like some of the devastating effects that happened recently by some of the water companies in respect to the sewage dumping into our oceans. I just wanted to get your take on that in respect to the challenge, and also kind of like what potential solutions can we work towards to ensure that this doesn't take place?
Well, we're going to be joining the fight to stop those new oil and gas fields in the North Sea, because the companies that are wanting to drill in the North Sea, they'll be getting huge subsidies from the taxpayer. They'll be making all of the profits, and all of the risk from a climate perspective and from a marine environment perspective will actually fall on us as individuals. This is the climate we all live in. We're in this week, recording this during the first days of COP27, the most important issue of our times that's affecting everyone. And more North Sea oil and gas is incompatible with our legal requirements to tackle climate change. There's no way we can keep on target for the 1.5 degrees sort of limit if we do further exploration. And renewable energy is 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels. So this is wrong on every level, and we're seeing people around the world already suffering hugely because of the climate that's changed dramatically since the industrial revolution. So that is the overarching issue. Everything else falls into and under that, even water quality. Because if you imagine the conditions we've had over the summer, very hot weather, drought, then very, very heavy rain, which we've seen, down here a lot since the summer. And that's flushing more and more sewage and other pollutants into the water. So these things are interconnected. They're very local issues, like you talked about, of a beach here or there with sewage spills, people outraged, is very much connected to the global issue that's being discussed in Sharm el Sheikh today for COP27. And to hear the words of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, today he says we're speeding towards, I paraphrase, speeding towards, a climate nightmare, and our foot is pressing down on the accelerator. This is the words of a diplomat. This is the words of somebody who normally would be moderate, and this is terrifying in terms of the prospects. Particularly in some countries where they're already suffering hugely because of flooding, because of droughts, because of famines driven by climate change. But even here, we're seeing the impacts, and it will circle the whole world. And the thing we need to do now is act fast on climate. And the sewage issue is one part of that, and it's another example. When I talked about Equinor, the oil company that's trying to get into the North Sea in a bigger way, these are companies making billions of pounds every quarter that are putting their profits ahead of protecting the planet, that are stealing the future from people's children, that are stealing the future of ecosystems and environments around the world, and animals that we treasure and are part of this rich world we live in. And the water companies are doing the same, making billions of pounds and polluting at will. And it's just a classic story. Big business riding roughshod over the world, profits people becoming so fixated on making obscene profits that they don't know how to moderate. We've got people who are earning far too much money, and companies that are making far too much money at the expense of the future. And it's sort of as simple as that.
Yeah, exactly, and we see it everywhere, right? We've looked at recently. Everybody in the UK at the moment, in respect to the cost of living crisis, like people are struggling to choose between heating and eating. We look at the available funds via the likes of a windfall. Like Treasury's own data points to the fact that over 2 years there's 170 billion available there,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, later this month, I think November 17th, we're going to get an autumn budget that'll talk about a 50 billion black hole in our finances. Well, there's 170 that's available immediately. So it's quite telling when you look at that, and you also look at for example, the volume of sewage that's being dumped into our oceans and rivers and around the UK at the same time as they're failing in respect to their commitments, yet their profits in respect to bonuses are just skyrocketing. So I think it's a case of short-termism at a time. We need to look towards a long path rather than the shortcut. And I think it's definitely up to groups like yourselves and others to come together to talk about what's possible, because like you hit the nail on the head earlier when you were talking about the cost benefit, because the cost of green infrastructure and green energy is far less. I think it's like 9 times less than the cost of the old kind of ways.
Yeah, look, I mean, renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy now, and whether we like it or not, the world has to radically change. And some of the things that we hold as sort of sacrosanct in terms of products today, we might not be able to have in a few years, in a short space of time. And people often portray, that sort of thing as this, a reduction in your standard of living, a reduction in, of choice. But it's completely ridiculous, because what we're having at the moment is a reduction in the stability of the very life support system that we have. Also, we can have an increased number of disposable items and convenience, and short hot flights to the continent for a weekend on the piss in Italy. And and the challenge is politicians, I think, they always would, of course, want to win over the electorate, and they think that anything that might do that will stop the electorate from voting for them. They also think that the electorate won't go with changes like that. But we've been through this dress rehearsal of the pandemic, and if we had been recording this 2.5 years ago, just before the pandemic in February 2020, if I told you, Peter, that you wouldn't be able to see your family and friends for a year, that you wouldn't go to an office, you wouldn't be able to go to the pub, and when you returned, you'd have to sanitize your hands and wear a mask, that all flights around the world would broadly stop, you would have probably laughed in my face, but we all sucked it up. We all saw the crisis. We all felt scared. We all stayed at home. We all did what we were told. And, I think this notion that what we have in society now it has to be sustained is wrong. Because look, there are lots of things we like, but if we're told that you can't have farmed salmon anymore, salmon every day, because it's too damaging to the marine environment and it's causing too much havoc to fish stocks, you'd probably go, fine, I'm not going to be able to eat sushi every day. I mean, I don't actually eat farmed salmon myself anyway. If somebody told you, look, that the age of flying around for short hot weekends is over. You're gonna have a carbon budget, and your first flight is going to be untaxed, and then after it's going to go up and up. Probably go, well, fair enough, like that. Good times happen, and then we've got to get with the program. These things can and do change, and then we look back even a short space of time in terms of what people had or didn't have. My grandparents, and I don't doubt yours too, they lived through the rationing era of the war, when people just got a small amount of sugar and butter and there was not much choice, and they had lives. They didn't have bad lives, and they had rich lives in other ways. And I think we've got all of the wrong metrics. Everything is geared around consumption and more consumption that we do these days. And actually what happened to the sort of more nourishing elements of life, and they're being eroded by technology, by social media, by this sort of need that people have to continually purchase stuff. We've been through this pandemic, and we all saw the huge changes we had to go through, and I think the world and people are prepared to change, and they will change. And governments need to be bolder in really setting out what's going to happen now in the face of climate change. We need to go into emergency action. We need to talk about how we restore the wild world around us, particularly ocean habitats, which have the capacity to bounce back much more quickly, marine protected areas, managing fish stocks. We need to get off oil as quickly as possible. And if that means we can't do as many things, it doesn't mean that our lives will be bad.
Well, I think it's about short-term loss versus long-term gain.
Yeah.
Because in the short term, the likelihood is we are going to have to cut back in order to move forward. And if you look at like the wider implications of that, what probably the pandemic showed us was like when we all did that collective will of follow instructions, go into lockdown, go through kind of periods of crisis together, it brings people
Yeah.
together. And I think the element that we have to see in front of us now is the realities are around the world we're faced by profound concerns about destabilizing levels of economic and political inequality, which is at the crux. It's the root cause of social unrest, and we're seeing unrest throughout the world. What's necessarily not being articulated too frequently is the fact that there is a tidal effect, and I truly believe that like the seas of change are upon us, and we're at an intertidal moment in our species, in our entire society, and how we go and change and evolve going forward. I honestly believe that there's a big movement for change coming, and it's going to be driven from the ground up. And I think the reality is, like, we all know that governments take a long time. They're not exactly the most mobile and of beasts when it comes to change. They take a long time to change, and they're largely driven by their donors and their donors' desires, and lobbying is quite a problem within not just the UK, but as we saw within America. And you can pick a nation, and lobbying is pretty damning. But ultimately, I think what I see, especially throughout the companies and people that I work with, is there is a desire for a movement for change that is about the long path and not the shortcut. That's ultimately what gives me solace about what the future holds, because I truly believe that there's more people that have a desire for the benefit of others and the benefit of future generations, and becoming that ancestor our future descendants need, averse to those kind of looking to perpetuate profit at the consistent pain of society.
Yeah. Look, I agree. Look, I think it's also about how much profit. There's a big aggregation of wealth that is not just really not right now. These are obscene amounts of money that individuals or small groups are amassing, and there is increasing inequality. And so, I think everyone understands that people need to make a profit. The businesses need to operate sustainably from a financial perspective. But we've just got to an era where it's gone wild, the amount of money people want to and expect to make. And so, look, I agree. I think we probably haven't seen anything yet. We've got just stop oil protesters on the M25 today, stopping traffic. We've had, XR, Extinction Rebellion, rising up around the world over the past few years. We've got the Fridays for the Future movement, but I don't think we've seen anything yet, because this is, a real emergency. And despite, all of the rhetoric at COP, I don't think people are hopeful it's going to come out with all of the solutions or the pace of change, because this isn't just about the words. This isn't just about the policy and legislation. This isn't just about international agreements. It's about action, and people aren't seeing that yet. Carbon emissions continue to rise. There's more and more development, around the world. Forests are being cut down. I mean, thankfully, um, the Bolsonaro has been voted out, and
Yeah,
Lula's in Brazil, which is good news for the environment. Thankfully, there are sort of clear signs from the public that they're not necessarily happy with an abandonment of the environment. We've seen the some of the most moderate environmental charities here in the UK. The charities like the National Trust and the Wildlife Trust and the RSPB all coming out really vociferously against the government's plans to repeal EU law. And so they've formed this coalition, which is all around this attack on nature, and so we're seeing quite a strong drive from the public, as you say, this sort of movement building stuff, and I am inspired by that. I sort of feel that we're not really looking at what is a binary thing that sometimes is projected through the media, which is we either win or lose, we live or die. What we're trying to do is create a situation when society can keep on working in the best possible way into the future, and the fewest number of people suffer during that time. And it's clear that when there's a huge amount of suffering that's already out there that will continue to grow. But I think what we're really talking about, because nature's going to be fine, we're really talking about our fight for survival as a human society and what that looks like. Because, give it a few 100,000 years, and if we're wiped off the planet, nature's going to come back in an even sort of stronger way around the world. And so, we're really talking about saving ourselves, not saving the planet. We're really talking about saving ways of life and expectations when we're talking about the climate fight, because nature's got all of the time in the world to bounce back and invent something else, and innovate a new species, or do whatever it wants to do, and that will fill niches and gaps that we can't do. We haven't got the technology to do what nature does over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and we never will. And so nature doesn't care about us, and doesn't need to, and we'll be fine. So all we're doing is fighting for our own survival.
yeah, but I think it's right in respect to how you articulate it. It's not like an us versus them narrative, and it shouldn't be. While some camps kind of want that narrative, the reality is it's just very clear. Like, the change is upon us, whether people like it or not, and it's driven largely through what people had collectively through the pandemic. We had this collective pain. We've all reflected on the way that we live and
Yeah,
operate throughout our lives. And as a result, pain plus reflection equals progress. And the progress people are wanting to make is a paradigm shift. Like, people want a new version of society that's driven for people and planet. And there's an overwhelming push for that to take place. And yeah, it's just going to take a little bit of time, but the reality is it is going to take place. And I'm quite encouraged by the what and optimistic by the future, because I think that we've got a unique opportunity now in these weeks, moments, and years ahead to build out the future that we all want and desire to see. And that future is largely for the benefit of both people and planet, and because we have shared empathy and care to maintain people and planet and maintain along the long path.
I agree with you. Look, I mean, and the truth, it makes the most economic sense to act with urgency now. To build all of the renewable infrastructure we can, whilst we can, to maybe invest the last of the sort of carbon budget in getting that really good work and necessary work done. I think people have to be really mindful of what are fool's lanterns or distractions at this time. The EV, the electrical vehicle revolution is seemingly this sort of savior thing to many people, but replacing private vehicles with more private vehicles is not a way that we're going to get everyone around and save the planet. It's just saving the automobile industry, and that's really sort of challenging. So we have to look at that long term sort of view. How do we create cities without vehicles and great public transport? How do we get people around in a way that is the most efficient, which is not everyone in their own vehicles? How do we create a new way of thinking about what we do and how we do it? And what are the things we can get rid of? And what will we look back on and say, wow, we lived through the age. We're in the peak maybe of the age of abundance. Literally, if I go onto Amazon now and order something, it'll probably be here in the morning. If I order by 8 o'clock, you can have anything. You go, how the hell are we in that society? Where you can get stuff so quickly, and the pace of everything is like a tightening coil. The pace of transactions is like a tightening coil around the planet that is constricting the life as we know it out of it. It's just impossible. I mean, the mind boggles. And for all of the sustainable brands, and I love brands that are trying to do better. There's no making of stuff that is not damaging to the planet. And so, compared to when you or I were a kid, there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, more brands, and lots of them are trying to do it more sustainably, but many, many thousands more brands doing it sustainably, worse than a few brands doing it unsustainably. It's a funny world we live in, and so people are trying to do less harm, but actually what we probably need to do is accept that there's going to be more restrictions on what we can consume and how quickly. Doesn't mean we're going to have a bad life. We'll get more time back.
One of the challenges we've talked about briefly about government, we've talked briefly about corporations, but one of their founding challenges is largely time. So if you look at governments get 4 years, it's 4-year cycles. They're very much driven by retention of power
Yeah.
and staying in power. Hence, they have to just play to the whims of who their largest donors and lobbyists are and what their members say. And then on the same side of it, you then get companies that every quarter they assess like how well they are doing from a monetary stance. Like, have they built and enabled more revenue growth? And growth is only it's not limitless. It's not never ending. So the fact is, we have to ultimately start thinking about how we measure success as a whole, and is it successful to profit at the basis of pain of others? And I think when people start thinking wider, more holistically about what is possible and what could take place, it ultimately leads to more, I would say, desire to come together, more international cooperation for change. Because I think the benefits of groups like COP is they get decision makers together in one place. There's a lot of negatives that, we could go through, but it gets decision makers into one place. Now they need to make decisions at this point in time. They need to look at mandating timeframes, and they need to look at committing and being held accountable to their commitments. I think that's where we've seen them go wrong in the past, and is the fact that we've let governments get away with what should be binding commitments for change. And I think because of that, it's kind of motivating others to do more.
I do agree with you on it's great that these decision makers are coming together. I do think it's a challenge. They do make decisions, but the implementation is what we're seeing is really lacking. I was at COP26 in Glasgow, and I was inside the venue speaking to people, and I was, an observer, and I was outside with the protesters too. And I think they're both really necessary. I think you need that civil society movement of people, some of the civil disobedient, some of the non-violent protests to drive change and keep the energy and momentum and public focus and political focus on it. You need the people, the diplomats and the people who are experts at writing policy and legislation and treaties to come together and be able to do that. And the sort of the real sort of missing part sometimes is the implementation. How people then act and how governments act and force. A lot of these things can go at glacial pace, and that's a horrible pun to use when we're talking
Yeah,
about
exactly.
fast melting glaciers now. They probably don't go as fast as glaciers melting, actually. The challenges, and look, I worked on things, on plastic legislation and stuff that we agreed and won in 2017, 18 still isn't like implemented, still is far off. And you're like, look, it's hardly the sign of like an emergency bit of action to deal with plastics choking our ocean. A lot of the work and the good words, of COP in, whether it's COP26 or any of the COPs before, still hasn't been implemented. The Stern report that I think was 2006, was it 8? Still hasn't been acted on, despite the fact that they set out that there was just no room for delay. And we keep sort of delaying this action, and it's the inevitable, and it's probably already costing the world more than it would have done anyway, in terms of the huge damage that's being caused by changing weather patterns and the things we're going to lose. And I think we're still blissfully unaware and ignorant of the major cities that are going to not be habitable, and they're not within our lifetimes. This isn't about a few hundred years away. This is like places may well not exist in our lifetimes. I mean, the prediction on sea level rise, I think at the 2 degrees that they're predicting now for the Maldives, is 80% of their land goes. 80% of a country disappears.
And even at 1.5, like they anything over that, like the Maldives and others are essentially gone. And then you kind of look at wider impacts of that, and we, as well as like a paradigm shift, I do think that there is an awful lot to be said about political change as well, because like any government, I'm not picking fault just in the UK, but any government that is in power for like 12 years and they aren't held accountable for their actions and their delivery is lacking, to say, then like it leads to problems. And when we see this throughout the UK, we see it in other developed nations as well. We see it in so-called underdeveloped nations. And I think there is a real lacking in leadership at the top, because the tone has always been the case, is always set from the top. And if the tone at the top is a bit kind of all over the place, is a polite way to put it, then when do we really see the implementation that society wants and clamors for? And that is why you're seeing more and more social unrest, because people are realizing that like there's a lacking of leadership by our so-called leaders. So people, businesses are coming together collectively from an organic level at the base and creating movements for change going forward. So that's why I'm quite encouraged.
I agree with that, and it's sort of revolutionary, really. I think people are getting wise. Politicians, it's so short-termism. They know that in 4 years they can't really change that much. They can do some superficial stuff. They know they might get 2 terms. Sadly, we've had a sort of 3 terms of probably what has been quite challenging government on many fronts. And people are starting to sort of wake up to it. And we've got a government that today I heard one target that was set to eliminate the chemical pollution of rivers. 2063 is the target. 2063. I mean, they're not just they're going to be out of office, they'll all be underground by that time. They'll be dead. There'll be skeletons. There'll be dust. This is like this is not a target. This is not a deliverable. This is an absolute fantasy numbers that people are like, we'd all love to do that in our job. Go, yeah, look, I'll clean the house in 2063, and
Yeah.
and it's just not, it's not consistent with what needs to happen in the world. And it's really only consistent with, this short-term profiteering that is sort of endemic in society now, and in rich countries. In fisheries terms, people often talk about the tragedy of the commons. This shared resource, and then basically everyone just tries to get as much as they can until there's nothing left. And if one person says, I won't take as much, then another person takes even more. And we've got the same, with climate, with carbon dioxide. As one country says, I'll make some cutbacks, another one wants to put even more out there, and it all gets sort of shifted around. And people are chewing through resources like there's no tomorrow. And maybe there is no tomorrow at that rate. So, and I think we've got to be careful now. There's this inflection point of sort of doomism. We've got sort of camps forming, people going, it's too late, we sort of can't do anything. And it sort of starts to feed that coil that's tightening around the planet, which is like, people are literally going, fuck it. Like what we meant to do? Why should we try at all? You've got the radical progressives, the people who can sort of see the opportunity in reforming the world. And then you've got people who just go, let's party till it's all over. And then you've got probably a load of people, despite you're clearly very passionate and knowledgeable about this stuff, but there's a lot of people who don't care, who want to watch. To use I think a Roman analogy, it's bread and circuses. Keep the bellies full, keep them entertained with I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, or whatever. And then they're all just, everyone's just placid.
But I think that is, I agree, that's problematic. But I think that's why it's important to like educate people, like share
Yeah,
new people to new people, share new
yeah,
information amongst new groups. I think that's the benefit for those, like understanding that mindsets cannot be fixed. They must be they must always be on the ability to kind of grow. That's probably the only beneficial element of growth. It is your mindset should be able to grow.
yeah, yeah,
There's that old analogy about leadership, and I have to harker back to this, but like real leaders lead on change, and we don't see real leadership at the moment, and it's kind of there seems to be a crisis of leadership throughout a lot of kind of nations, and that in itself, if we look to things like the cost of living crisis, like people are naturally have a desire to kind of harker back into themselves and, say fuck it, because like fear limits people. But when you are able to see that actually this has been done over there, this has been done here, this has been done there, and start connecting the dots.
yeah. You're right. And look, I think we need the politics of hope. And you're right. Leaders truly do lead. They got to set out a vision
Exactly.
for their supporters, or their sort of their base. And that's so important. If you don't set out a vision, what do you want to happen? I mean, I'm in the midst of setting out my vision for for a small team of people, and I've got to make sure they're motivated. I've got to create the conditions to take people along on a journey where we can win campaigns and create change. And growth, naturally, part of growth is death, regeneration, and succession. And nothing lasts forever. And that's, I mean, we're seeing that in society as we know it. You see it in political parties after 1, 2, 3 term. Whatever your political persuasion. I think that all parties have good and bad elements to them. That you may not ultimately believe in the whole of either any shade of the political spectrum, but there'll be good and bad people working throughout any system and organization. It definitely feels like that we're seeing now the time. for sort of really big change politically. Pretty excited to see that. I think people want more. Radical is a bad word. I think people really want to see some progressive stuff that rebalances society in a better way. And rebalancing society will rebalance our relationship with nature too, because most of the harm comes from the aggregation of wealth and power that then
Yeah.
can't be dismantled.
I was going to say, like, it is worth saying that I think as we move forward, what we will likely see is a more even distribution of wealth. Because, like,
Yeah,
if you look back in society as we've evolved as a species, we've always had these kind of change moments, and these change moments are largely driven by such rising levels of inequality, and ultimately it leads to an uprising of people. And what we see at the moment is like huge levels of inequality, high levels of inflation, and we're about to see high levels of cuts to public services.
yeah,
The likelihood is you end up, there's further knock-on effects in respect to where we go from there. Like it's another boom or bust point in our time, and I think that we just need to make more thoughtful and pragmatic and positive approaches to change and to policy and involve people because like I'm not affiliated to a party. I'm more aligned to the fact that I think collective groups of people and diverse viewpoints and thinking should be part of the conversation as long as we look towards action, because I don't see the point in having a conversation if it leads to no action. Like there has to be some point of action or some need for a conversation to take place. And that's like the benefit of this podcast, because people are learning as they listen, and then they encourage themselves to then go out and learn a little bit more and connect to new people, and then through that individual decision to change themselves, they can help change others as well.
completely. And I think people need to sort of keep moving and keep hopeful. I mean, whatever happens, if you're lightly listening to this podcast, if you've got a device to do that, if you've got an interest in this, you'll have the power and sort of an ability to create change and to go out there and use your life for the best good you can do. And we can't all try and do good every day, and like none of us doesn't has a zero impact on the world, but we can strive to have a bigger, better sort of impact on the world. And what does that look like? I mean, people have been fixated on reusable cups and water bottles for years. But I mean, I'm not sure that's saving the world. It's not bad per se. Do it. You should all do it. But ultimately, what we need to do is use our voice and lend our voice to different systems that can create change. The political system, we all have to vote. Vote with the environment and people in mind. You can use your spending power to choose better products for the world. You can lend your voice to organizations like the National Trust, like Oceana, like the Wildlife Trust, to support the public lobbying effort to change laws and protect the planet, protect our rights to campaign, protect our rights to protest, protect people and livelihoods, all of those things. And those are good things. So we can all do more and think about that connects to all of the issues we've sort of discussed. But the environmental issue, whether it's making sure that on the sort of climate front, you're thinking about that at in the voting booth when you're putting your cross on the card, and thinking about that when it comes down to sewage pollution and plastic pollution. What party is going to represent your interests in the best way, who's coupling positive economic growth with good environmental stewardship and restoration, and a redistribution of wealth in the right way. All of those things that can be good. You can use your money to buy good products, and or not buy products where you can sort of avoid to and get things that last sort of longer, and then not forget, that life is a really precious thing, and you've been like blessed to just be on the planet. And you got to take a moment to pause on that, because life is now and everything is rolling along, and that's an incredible thing in its own right. That we live in an age where there's been so much that's possible, and we're so connected, and we mustn't forget what a privilege that is too, and use that privilege for good impact.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great place to finish. It's true. Like, life is to be lived, not squandered, and people have a real opportunity now to kind of live the lives that they want to live, but live it through the lens that, like, we have an opportunity to leave a lasting legacy for others behind us by the actions and decisions that we make today. There's no future in the past, but there is an opportunity for change of the future. So I think where we go from here is dictated very much by ourselves, and that's why I'm encouraged by what we have to do.
Well, look, Peter, it's been great to talk to you. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Purpose Made podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to Purpose Made wherever you normally get your podcasts to hear the latest news and views. You can also find and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter, or contact Peter directly to connect, inquire about Purpose Made, or request to be featured on the podcast. We look forward to welcoming you back soon for another episode.